Hey folks, I'm going to pour a little more of that. Uh, Today I'm coming to you, we're going to talk a little bit about single pot still Irish whiskey. Um, I was going to do it a little later tonight, so I'm rushing around here a little bit, but it looks like we're going to have rain, and maybe it'll start raining in the middle of this. Anyway, let's get talking. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about, as I said, a single pot still Irish whiskey. I kind of covered the topic a little bit in my Irish whiskey focus that I did around St. Patrick's Day. You might want to go back, and if you want to see a whole rundown of a whole bunch of Irish whiskeys, you might want to go back in the feed and check that out. But that's very long. I'm not going to be here that long today. Anyway, what I'm going to talk about is a couple of whiskeys here and give you a little explanation of what we're talking about when we say single pot still Irish whiskey. We're aware of all the different Irish whiskeys that we have, from the very basic, Jameson and Bushmills and, Tullamore Dew. Not by basic, I don't mean there's anything wrong with it, but it's just, your standard Irish whiskey, which is kind of along the lines of a Scotch blended whiskey. You have barley in there, malted barley in there, but you have other grains in there that make up an Irish whiskey. Single pot still is a little different, and it has a little different clarification. Now, a couple of things. What are we talking about when we're talking single pot still? It's similar to single malt Scotch whiskey, okay? But we don't want to get thrown off by that word single. The single in both whiskeys, both Scotch and single pot still Irish whiskey, is only referring to the distiller that it is coming from. One distiller, okay? So it doesn't have to be, it's not saying it's one pot or anything like that. It's just coming from one distiller. And in one of these choices today, I'm going to show you there is a little bit of a difference there. So we're not focusing so much on the single, but we're talking about the pot still Irish whiskey, which is a classification that has come about in Ireland that it designates this as something special or different from what we were talking about before. So when we have a single pot still Irish whiskey, what we are talking about is very similar to Scotch, a single malt Scotch. We're talking about barley, okay, as the only ingredient in Scotch, but there's a little bit of flexibility here. We'll talk about it. So what's the difference? What makes this so special? Well, here's what it is. Single pot still Irish whiskey is made up of both malted and unmalted barley, and you can also add a trace element of some other grain in there to create this different flavor. Okay, so the history on that. Let's talk a little bit about that. So way back in the centuries ago, the Irish were making whiskey in the pot still using malted barley. Okay, just like Scotch. And all of a sudden, the British government started taxing malted barley very, very heavily in the tax act of the Malt Tax of 1682. I had to read that one off the notes. And interestingly enough, the Irish got smart after a while, and it was costing them a lot of money in taxes to make this stuff. So what they did is they changed it up, and they created this recipe, so to speak, of using some malted barley and some unmalted barley, which wasn't taxed, or at least taxed anywhere near as heavily as malted barley. So that came together into a recipe, and then they would sometimes add one little trace of an extra grain to come up with this recipe, which then they would produce in a copper pot still. Now, if you need to understand what that's all about, there's two kinds of stills, and most, let's put it this way, this is again a generalization. Scotch whiskey is more often than not done in a copper pot still, okay, with a pot still with a big bulb on the bottom with a small stem. Single pot still Irish whiskey, a lot of the grain whiskey that's used in blends is done in the other type, which is called a coffee still or a column still, or what's the other word for it? I can't remember what it is. Okay, a column still or a copper pot still is actually shaped like this bottle a little bit more, where a column still might look like this post a little bit. Smaller bulb on the bottom with a longer stem, okay? That's what you're making gin and other distilled, kind of clear liquor in the column still or a coffee still. There's a lot of different names for that still. Anyway, we're talking about this copper pot. So the use of the copper pot still, which engrades some type of flavor, along with this mixture of unmalted barley and malted barley, created this different flavor profile that ends up tasting a little greenier, or a little more greenier. That's a word, I don't know. A little spicier and just different from the Scotch malt, single malt counterpart that was kind of running around. All right, it's been around for a long time, single pot still Irish whiskey, but it almost kind of fell off the map along with most of Irish whiskey, in the middle of the 20th century. Fell out of favor. Not a lot of producers. There were only three distillers left in Ireland for a while, and then all of a sudden there was kind of this branching out, and a couple of different companies put out a single pot still here, and then now these newer distilleries, or maybe shall we say distilleries that did make it and are owned by a bigger company or whatever, are now starting to produce single pot still Irish whiskey once more. I'm trying to think if there's anything else of the kind of the lore of it. So yeah, just to explain what we're talking about, malted, we've gone through this many times in some of my videos. Malted barley, we're talking about barley that's left saturated, and then when it starts to sprout, they heat it up really quickly, and then stop that sprouting, the germination. I sometimes use the word fermentation, and it's wrong. I mean germination. A lot of Asians here. All right. So they stop that germination, and then they grind it up, and it turns into that's your malted barley. Okay. If they don't malt it. They just take the barley and they ground it up, and that's it. So this combination gives this kind of whiskey a particular flavor. All right. Let's talk a little bit more about in the now. Okay. We're going to look at some of them that I have here. I do not have a complete collection of all of this, and there's a couple of very big holes here, but I got the high points in my consideration. So the first thing is, what are we looking for? On all three of these four, you're going to see the word single pot style, or single pot still Irish whiskey. Okay, it's on the Powers 3 Swallows. It's on the Redbreast 12. It's on the Kilbeggan single pot still Irish whiskey. I'm going to start calling that an SPS. In a lot of the magazines that we see, we're going to see SPS as the abbreviation for single pot still Irish whiskey. Okay, SPS Irish whiskey. Here's a kind of an outlier. This is one by the Glendalough company. If you remember, kind of familiar with some of my videos, their 13-year, which is not a SPS, was my favorite whiskey experience of 2020, but this is their pot still Irish whiskey version. Notice that this one, and there's a couple other brands out there, it doesn't say single. Okay, that doesn't mean it's any worse. It's just they can't legally put single on here because Glendalough, up until now, is still a sourced whiskey company. So they are not distilling a whiskey. They do blends, or in this case, single malt vattings, and they do aging. Okay, so that's why it doesn't say single on this one. Okay, there's a couple other companies that are doing that. Okay, so they get their product from what's the company? It'll come to me in a second. I forgot which company it is. I mentioned it in other videos, but they get their source whiskey, and it's half of the bourbons that we drink are probably sourced whiskey. Okay, so it's sourced. And then they're bringing it together and doing some different things with it. So, but for the most part, we're looking for single pot still Irish whiskey. All right, let's go through a couple here. The first one is I have Powers 3 Swallows. Powers is coming out of the Middleton Company, which is one of the three, big distillers that have made it through the ages. Very popular, although the 3 Swallows one isn't as popular as the other one, their other pot still, which is called John Lane's. Okay, so look for either of these. This one's a little harder to find now. It was also a little more affordable when it was out. The John Lane's one, not Johnny Lee Lane, but John Lane's version is also very good, but it's a little more pricey. This one is real unique. This one is mostly aged in a ex-bourbon barrel, like many of these and most Scotch whiskey, or all Scotch whiskey, to be honest. And then after that, they're also blending it a little bit with some whiskey that was aged in Oloroso sherry casks. Okay, so that has It's still all the same distillery, so it's all single, but that gives it a little bit of that flavor, and we're familiar with that flavor of sherried whiskey. Okay, so again, aged mostly in bourbon barrels, mixed with some that has been aged in Oloroso sherry casks. Okay, very good one. I don't know if it's the fact that I know it was done in a copper pot, but this has a pleasantly metallic kind of flavor, a lot of caramel, a lot of spice on it. And again, all of these are going to have like an interesting combination of a little bit of sweetness from that malted barley, but then that unmalted barley gives it a little bit more of a grassy green flavor. And since I'm sitting here almost getting enveloped by these grapevines, it's a good way to do this video. Okay, so that's Powers. Probably the flagship one of what I got on the table, and what's probably the most popular single pot still Irish whiskey on the market today is Redbreast. Okay, we've talked about this before. We've gone on and out about it. This is imported into the United States by Pernod Ricard, which is a big company, but this is high quality stuff. I can't say enough about it. This is probably the freshest tasting Irish whiskey that you can probably taste. It has this very unique, clean flavor, but then there's complexity enough, and it has a little kind of a creamy quality as well. This is kind of the same as this one in terms of bourbon barrel and then Oloroso finish. I don't know if it's the same whiskey that they're finishing twice. Maybe it even says here. I don't think it says here, but they're a little secretive about this. But you cannot go wrong with Redbreast unless you don't have a lot of money. All Redbreasts are just a little more expensive. They kind of, I mean, it's worth it, but they're kind of getting a little bit of that Macallan or Lagavulin flair in their pricing right now. They're the brand name to have, so you're paying, well, as I like to say, a 10% branding tax on that, which is not true, but it seems like there's another $7 or $8 added on to all their bottlings just because it's the most popular Irish whiskey out there, single pot still Irish whiskey out there. All right, I'm going to bring this one into the hanger here with a couple more. So the third one is something that's brand new to me, and this is this Kilbeggan. Now, Kilbeggan has a couple of different, standard, grain blended Irish whiskeys out, and I had heard about it before, but then I read about this one in Whiskey Advocate. Okay, Whiskey Advocate was rated as 7 for the year of 2020. It's 7th. Okay, so that kind of stuck out. It was kind of affordable. The only thing is, it was a little hard to find. It is a limited release, but lo and behold, my local store at Vinnie's here in Chicago on the northwest side, in Lincolnwood to be exact. I'm giving you hints if anybody's going to go run out and grab one. They had 6 left. Well, now they have 5 left. Okay, Kilbeggan is very interesting because they do what I had mentioned before is single pot still Irish whiskey, but they're doing in a very old style recipe where they're adding 2.5% oats to the mash of blended malt and malted barley and unmalted barley. That little addition makes this one a favorite. Really good stuff. Adds a little kind of cereal nutty, a good way, kind of oatmeal note to it. Nuts and this one is really, really good. That's what I'm going to drink right now. So why don't I give you some tasting notes? On the nose, this is the Kilbeggan SPS Irish whiskey. Kind of fruity. A little bit of like wood, but nuts. Very good stuff. Woo! All right, let's go in for a taste. I think Redbreast is going to be my favorite all-time, all-around single pot still Irish whiskey. For something a little different, this is going to be my favorite from now on. Has a really nice balance. I get apricot, I get stone fruit, I get all those kinds of flavors, but it's balanced. Then there's a nuttiness there. There is especially hazelnut, but nothing too sweet or overpowering. There's a lot of wood there, and this has only been aged in ex-bourbon barrels, whereas this had that sherry blast. This is just ex-bourbon, and I get that oak in there, and then on the end, that oat flavor really comes through, and it feels like you've had a nice bowl of, I don't know, Irish oatmeal. I don't know. Maybe I'll go a little too far, but it's really delicious. This one is really good. I'm going to say, if you can go out and find this one, again, Kilbeggan, this is a single pot, still Irish whiskey. Chicagoans on the northwest side, I've given you a hint. There's only a few left in the area, and a lot of them are at the Lincolnwood store. Shout out to the Lincolnwood store. Well, they don't know me from Adam over there. So we talked about Adam. Let's talk about St. Kevin. So this is the last one here. This is the Glendalough, which I've mentioned before. And again, this is a sourced whiskey, but this one is a real interesting one. So this one is, and this is what this company does, this Glendalough company does is, again, they're not distilling it, they're buying it, but what they're doing is, what they do with aging and barreling before they put it out is what's interesting with this company. So I have the other one, which is called the double barrel, and then I have that Mizunara cask, which I've talked about forever, 13 year. This one, it's got some batch stuff on there, but what they do on this one is to make it kind of their own, is it's aged in a bourbon barrel, ex-bourbon barrels, like all of these, and then they age it in some barrels local to this area, and I had it in my brain until I just forgot. What is it? Made from trees felled around the distillery. Okay, where is the distillery? It's in Ireland. There you go. All right. Boy, that was bad. I think it's in the area of Glendalough. Okay, is that a river? I don't even remember anymore. I'm losing track on this. Anyway, this is a real nice one. Although there's not a sherry influence one, I would say that if you're looking for this is not cheap, but if you can't, swing the redbreast, I would go with either of these, okay? This one is still kind of readily available. This one's going to be a little harder to find, this Kilbeggan. So that's my kind of talk down on this. I've been going for almost 20 minutes. Let me have one more sip of this. Looks like we're going to get rain in about 20 seconds. So let's start talking about single pot still Irish whiskey. There are some brands that I've obviously left out because I don't have. Teeling has some. There's a lot of other, companies that have, especially now as more and more of these distillers are coming out. Just be sure you know what you're talking about in terms of clarification, okay? Single pot still Irish whiskey. All those words need to be there, and then you can assume that it's done in a copper pot still, and it's done with both malted and unmalted barley, and maybe a little extra in this case, some extra grain. That's all cool. If it doesn't say single, you might still be cool. If they still are calling themselves pot still Irish whiskey, that's more of a style. Okay, if it just says copper pot, which is like Writer's Tears, okay, that's another one, that is not a single pot still Irish whiskey. It's done in a copper pot, but they're using barley and other grains. Still a fine whiskey, just not a single pot still Irish whiskey. That's all I got for now. If you have a favorite of this style that I missed or I just didn't talk about or want to talk about a little more, please go ahead and write them in. On the Redbreast, there's also the Stow edition, which brings the wine flavor a little bit more. And then there's the cask strength, which we've talked about, which is great. On this one, you could go and get, your cheaper varieties. You might like it, but this one was a real good one. Kilbeggan is a killer. Glendalough, and then finally the Powers, the old standby, the old standard. Again, don't be fooled. Powers has about 5 different lines out right now, but the Three Swallows and the John Lanes are the only one that are copper pot still Irish whiskey. All right, I'm going to wrap this up. Have one more drink in the glass. The thing I love about all this and why it intrigues me, and I hope it intrigues you, is I am so fascinated, with wines, you got grapes and stuff, there are so many different ways to make it different. There's not that many ways to get differences in whiskey, at least that I know of. Yet, all 4 of these have a distinct flavor profile that I could pick up if you blindfold tested me on it. And that's what I find so fascinating. So I like to kind of check out the process and all that, and that just makes me happy. The only problem with it is I still got a little bit more. So anyway, have a good one. Enjoy your Irish whiskey.